The voicemail was 43 seconds long. I know because I listened to it 11 times. My mother's voice came through the speaker flat and rehearsed, like she'd practiced in the car on the way to wherever she was going that was more important than calling me live. Your father and I have talked it over. We're simplifying things. You understand. Click. That was it. No explanation, no argument to respond to, just a decision delivered like a weather update. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of the hospital where I work. Third floor, level C, the spot I've parked in for 6 years because it's close to the stairwell and I'm always running late. I remember the hum of the fluorescent light above me flickering. I remember a minivan pulling out 2 spaces down. I remember thinking, they rehearsed this. My mother rehearsed ending our relationship and still only gave me 43 seconds. I set my phone face down on the passenger seat. I sat there for a while, not crying, just recalibrating, the way you do when something you half expected finally arrives, and it's still somehow worse than you prepared for. Then I picked my phone back up and got to work. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened next. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I'm a licensed CPA. I spend my days inside spreadsheets and tax codes and depreciation schedules. I think in systems. I look at a problem and I find the lever. That's not coldness. That's just how my brain was built. And when my mother left me that voicemail, my brain did what it always does. It found the levers. The first one was the business account. 3 years ago, my parents started a small event rental company. Tents, tables, linens, lighting, the kind of operation that books wedding weekends and corporate retreats. My father had the vision and my mother had the charm, and neither of them had any idea how to file a Schedule C or set up payroll or navigate quarterly estimated taxes. So I became their unofficial CFO. Unofficial, meaning unpaid, meaning I did it because they were my parents and I thought that's what family did. I had full administrator access to their QuickBooks account. I had the login for their business banking portal. I had the password to the email address tied to their merchant processor. I had all of it because they trusted me with all of it, or more accurately, because neither of them wanted to deal with it and I was convenient. I didn't touch any of it that night. I'm not impulsive. But I documented everything. I opened a fresh Google Doc, timestamped it, and I started writing down every asset I had access to and every decision I need to make. In accounting, we call this a ledger. I've been keeping an invisible one in my head for years. That night, I finally put it on paper. The ledger was longer than I expected. $41,000. That's what I'd put into my parents' business in the first 2 years, disguised as loans that came with a handshake and no promissory note because my mother said putting it in writing would hurt her feelings. Equipment purchases, a storage unit deposit, 6 months of liability insurance when their policy lapsed and they had a booking the following weekend. I paid it because canceling would have cost them the contract, and the contract was worth $12,000 and they needed it. The year before that, my grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman who called me every Sunday until the week she died, had left me a small inheritance. $22,000. I was 28 and it was the most money I'd ever had at one time. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table within 3 weeks of the estate settling. My father explained that the house needed a new roof. The estimate was $19,000. He looked at me with the specific expression he reserved for moments when he needed something and had already decided I'd give it. I did. I told myself it was an investment in the family home. I told myself it would matter someday. It never came up again. And then there was the thing I'd never told anyone, the thing that lived at the bottom of the ledger, the entry I'd tried for years to write off as a misunderstanding. I was 24. I had just passed my CPA exam on the first attempt, which only about half of candidates do. I was proud of myself in a way I hadn't let myself be proud of anything ever, because in my family, visible pride was considered embarrassing. I called my parents to tell them. My father said, "Well, let's hope the job market cooperates." My mother asked if I was still seeing the guys she didn't like. That was the entire conversation. 2 days later, I found out through my cousin that my parents had thrown a dinner party the same week. They'd told everyone my brother had just been promoted to regional manager at his company. They toasted him. My mother cried happy tears. My father gave a speech. I had not been invited to the dinner. I did not know it was happening. My brother's promotion was real, and I was genuinely happy for him. But I drove home from my cousin's house that night, and I sat in my apartment and I understood something I'd been refusing to understand for years. I was not in the same category as my brother in my parents' accounting. I never had been. I was the one who handled things. He was the one who mattered. I filed that knowledge away and kept showing up. That's the part people always ask about. Why did you keep helping them? And I've thought about it a lot, the way you think about a math problem you solved wrong for years before someone showed you where the error was. The answer is that I believed, on some level, that the ledger would eventually balance, that if I kept depositing, eventually there would be a withdrawal from me. A moment when they'd see it, when they'd say it. That moment never came. Instead, I got 43 seconds in a parking garage. I went into the office the next morning like nothing had happened. That's the thing about being the functional one in a dysfunctional system. You're very good at showing up. At lunch, I called my brother, not to tell him about the voicemail, I wasn't ready for that, but just to hear his voice, to see if he knew anything. He picked up on the third ring, already a little distracted, the TV on in the background. "Hey," he said. "You talked to Mom and Dad lately?" "A little," I said. "Why?" There was a pause I didn't like. "They mentioned they're restructuring some things with the business. I think they might be bringing someone else in to handle the books." "Someone else?" I said. "Yeah, I don't know the details. Some guy Dad knows from the Chamber of Commerce. I asked him if he knew they called me. He said he knew something had happened, but he didn't want to get in the middle of it. Then he said he had a meeting and got off the phone." I sat at my desk and looked at my monitor for a moment. The spreadsheet I'd been working on was still open, column after column of clean, organized numbers, everything adding up the way it was supposed to. Then I opened a new browser tab and logged into their QuickBooks. I want to be precise about what I did because people make assumptions. I did not steal anything. I did not delete anything. I did not do anything that a reasonable person would call sabotage. What I did was methodical and quiet and completely within my rights as someone who had been abruptly terminated from a role I'd held for 3 years, with no notice and no conversation. I removed myself as an administrator on their QuickBooks account. I exported a complete copy of every financial record I had ever touched, every transaction, every reconciliation, every payroll run, and saved it to my own secure drive. Then I removed my access. I went to their business banking portal and removed my credentials. I did not remove theirs. I left everything intact. I just took myself out of it. Then I went to the merchant processor account, the one tied to the email address I had set up for them, using a recovery email that happened to be mine because my father didn't want to manage another inbox. I updated the recovery email to a new address I controlled and logged out. Here's the thing about a merchant processor account. When you run a small event business, that account is how you receive deposits. It's how clients pay you. It's how the money moves. If you lose access to that account, if the two-factor authentication starts going to an email you can't reach, you don't find out right away. You find out when a client tries to pay you and the payment fails, or when you try to run payroll and the funds aren't transferring correctly, or when your busy season starts and everything that should be automatic suddenly isn't. It was April. Their busy season started in May. I did not feel guilty. I want to say that plainly because I think there's an expectation that I should have, but I had spent years feeling guilty for things that weren't my fault, and I had decided, somewhere around the 11th replay of that voicemail, that I was done carrying guilt as a default state. I had given them everything they asked for. I had shown up every time. The invoice was due. The payment method on file had been deleted. 3 days after the voicemail, my father called me from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. I did. "There's something wrong with the accounts," he said. No hello. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Just the problem because to him, I was still the person who fixed problems. "Which accounts?" I said. "All of them. The QuickBooks is showing some kind of permission error, and the processor, I can't get into the processor." "When did you last update your login credentials?" I asked. "I don't, that's your thing. That's what you handle." "I don't handle it anymore," I said. "You made that decision." Silence. Then, that's not we need to talk about this. We are talking, I said. Is there something specific you need? He wanted me to fix it. Of course he wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to be the person I'd always been, the one who absorbed the consequence and made it disappear. But here's what he didn't know. I had spent 3 days quietly making sure that undoing what I'd done would require a formal engagement letter, a professional services agreement, and an hourly rate of $220. Because that is what a CPA with my credentials and my years of experience charges. I had drafted the agreement already. I had it ready to send. I told him that if he wanted my professional assistance, I was happy to provide it as a paid consultant. I told him my rate. I told him I could send him the agreement that day. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It had texture to it. He was recalibrating, the same way I had in the parking garage, finding out that the levers he expected to pull weren't where he left them. "You're really going to do this?" he said. "I already did," I said. He hung up. My mother called 20 minutes later. She was using the voice she uses when she's performing emotion rather than feeling it. A little breathless, a little wounded, as though the problem was my reaction rather than her action. She said I was being vindictive. She said I was hurting the family. She said my grandmother would be ashamed of me, which was the cruelest thing she could have reached for. And she knew it. And the fact that she reached for it told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation was going to go. I let her talk for a while. I've learned that sometimes people need to exhaust the first script before they can hear anything else. Then I said, "Mom, you left me a voicemail. 43 seconds. After everything I've done for this family, you couldn't even call me." Another silence. "We thought it would be easier," she finally said. "Easier for who?" She didn't answer. "I'll send Dad the consulting agreement," I said. "If you want my help, that's the arrangement. If you don't, I genuinely wish you the best with the business." I hung up. I won't pretend I felt triumphant. I felt hollow, the way you feel after something ends. Not sad exactly. More like the absence of something that had been there so long, I'd stopped noticing its weight until it was gone. What I didn't know yet was that the situation was about to become significantly more complicated. My grandmother, my father's mother this time, not the one who'd left me the inheritance, had been ill for 2 years. She was 81, sharp as ever mentally, but her body was winding down. She'd been close to me in a way. She wasn't close to the rest of the family, which I'd always attributed to the fact that I used to spend summers with her as a kid, learning to play cards and cook things from scratch, and sit quietly with another person without feeling the need to fill the silence. She called me Sonny. I don't know why. She never explained it. She passed away on a Thursday morning. My aunt called me, not my parents. That told me something. The attorney handling the estate, a careful, unhurried man named Mr. Voss, called me himself 2 days later. He told me the will reading was scheduled for the following Monday at my grandmother's house. He said my presence was specifically requested. He said in this part he emphasized that I should be prepared for the meeting to take some time. I knew, in an abstract way, that my grandmother had assets. She'd owned her home outright for 30 years. She'd been careful with money in a way that her son, my father, had never managed to be. But I didn't know the specifics, and I hadn't let myself think about them, because thinking about what she might leave behind felt too close to waiting for her to die, which I had never done. I got to the house early. My parents were already there, along with my brother and his wife, my aunt, and 2 cousins I barely knew. The living room was the same as it always was, the same furniture, the same lamp with the beaded shade, the same faint smell of cedar and something floral I could never identify. I found her chair, the one in the corner by the window, and I stood next to it for a moment before sitting down on the couch. My mother glanced at me when I came in. She didn't say anything. My father studied his phone. My brother gave me a small, uncomfortable nod. His wife looked at the ceiling. Mr. Voss arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. He set his briefcase on the dining table, which had been cleared and extended for the occasion. He didn't make small talk. He put on his glasses and he opened the file. The estate, he said, was more substantial than most of us had known. The house appraised at 400,000. There was a brokerage account, index funds held patiently for decades, worth approximately $900,000. There was a savings account with $160,000, life insurance with a $250,000 benefit, total just over $1.8 million. I heard my brother's wife exhale slowly. I heard my mother shift in her seat. I watched my father's jaw tighten in the particular way it does when he is doing math in his head, and the numbers are exciting him. Mr. Voss took a breath and continued reading. Specific bequests first. Each grandchild received $10,000. Both cousins, my brother and me, $10,000 each, noted with warmth and by name. Then some items of sentimental value. The beaded lamp to my aunt. A jewelry box to one of the cousins. Her recipe collection to me, along with a handwritten note that I pocketed without reading in front of anyone. Then the residual estate, the house, the brokerage account, the savings, the insurance, the bulk of it bequeathed to her son, my father. Except, Mr. Voss paused here and looked up over his glasses in a way that made the room go still. There was a condition attached, he said. A condition my grandmother had added 18 months ago when she'd revised the will following what he referred to only as a family matter she felt required addressing. The condition was this: the residual inheritance would be held in a discretionary trust. Distributions were at the trustee's discretion. The trustee was not my father. The trustee was me. My father's expression didn't change immediately. It takes him a moment always to process things that don't fit the story he's already written. I watched him catch up. "That's not right," he said. "It is precisely correct," Mr. Voss said. He turned the page toward my father so he could read it himself. She didn't understand what she was signing. She was on medication. She revised this document in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary, Mr. Voss said. She was assessed for capacity by her physician prior to signing. There is documentation. My mother looked at me. "Did you know about this?" "No," I said. And that was true. I had not known. But sitting there in my grandmother's living room, in the chair beside hers, I thought about all the Sunday phone calls, all the time she'd asked me careful questions about how I was doing, what I was managing, whether I was being taken care of. I thought about how she had once said to me, quietly in the kitchen while we were washing dishes, that she worried sometimes that I gave too much and was thanked too little. I had laughed it off. She had not laughed it off. She had not laughed. She had done something about it instead. 18 months ago, quietly, with a notary and 2 witnesses, she had done something about it. The room was loud for a while after that. My father accused Mr. Voss of errors. My mother suggested the document had been tampered with. My brother sat very still, which is what he does when he doesn't know whose side to be on. My aunt, to her credit, said nothing negative. She reached over at one point and touched my hand briefly, which I've thought about many times since. Mr. Voss was not rattled. He had clearly run this meeting before. He answered every objection with documentation, calmly, until my father ran out of objections and began making threats instead. He would contest the will. He would hire his own attorney. He would prove undue influence, and here he looked directly at me with an expression I recognized from my childhood, the one designed to make me feel responsible for whatever was happening around me. I met his eyes. In accounting, when you discover an error in a prior period's return, you don't panic. You file an amended return. You correct the record. You don't pretend the original numbers were right just because fixing them is uncomfortable. I said, "You can contest it. That's your right. The process will take between 12 and 24 months, during which time the assets remain frozen, and no distributions can be made to anyone, including you." I paused. "Or you can accept the terms as written, and I can begin making distributions in accordance with my grandmother's wishes, which include ongoing support for your household expenses, as she specifically outlined." He had not known about that last part. Neither had my mother. I watched them process it. The fact that fighting me meant freezing the money and accepting meant I controlled the money, but the control came with a document specifying that I would use it to support them, because my grandmother had known they would need that promise in writing before they could bring themselves to accept it. She had thought of everything. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. "What are the distributions?" my father asked finally. His voice was quieter now. The threat had gone out of it. "Monthly." I said, based on documented need and consistent with the trust's purpose. And if he stopped, started again. And if we want to discuss the arrangement, you can request a meeting, I said, in writing. I'll respond within 5 business days. He didn't like it. That was clear. But the alternative was 18 months of frozen assets and legal fees they couldn't afford, and somewhere in that calculation, the fight went out of him. They left without speaking to me again. My brother paused in the doorway, long enough for me to see that he wanted to say something and couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't help him. He left. My aunt stayed behind while Mr. Voss packed up his briefcase. She sat across from me at the cleared dining table and said, "She would have wanted to see your face just now." "Which part?" I asked. She smiled a little. "All of it." The weeks that followed were strange, not triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't walking around feeling like I'd won something. I was mostly just tired. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from finally stopping a pattern you've been in for years. Your body doesn't know what to do with the absence of the familiar tension. I made the first trust distribution on the 1st of the following month, exactly as documented. I kept my records meticulous. I sent monthly statements to all interested parties. I did everything by the book, because that is how I do everything, and because my grandmother had trusted me with something that mattered, and I was not going to be careless with it. My father sent a written request for a meeting as I had specified. I responded within 5 business days as I had promised. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, my suggestion, and it was one of the more surreal hours of my life. He was not warm. I was not warm, but he was, for the first time I could remember, speaking to me like I was someone whose position he needed to consider. It was an uncomfortable revelation, the way realizing you've been holding a muscle tense for years is uncomfortable when it finally releases. I told him that the consulting engagement was still available if he wanted help stabilizing the business. He accepted. I sent the agreement that evening. He signed it the next day. My mother called me a few weeks after that, not with the performed emotion voice, with the actual one, which I hadn't heard in so long I almost didn't recognize it. She said she'd been thinking about the voicemail. She said she knew it was a bad way to handle things. She didn't use the word sorry. She's not built for that word. I've accepted it. But she said she knew it was wrong, and coming from her, that's the closest thing there is. I told her I appreciated her saying so. I don't know what we are now. Not what we were before, which in retrospect was not the relationship I'd been telling myself it was. Not estranged. Something in the middle, careful, honest in a way we'd never been, without the pretense that everything was fine. It's uncomfortable. I think it might also be real. I go back to my grandmother's house sometimes. I have a key. I'm handling the estate, so I have things to check on, practical things. But sometimes I go when there's nothing to check on. I sit in the living room in the chair by the window. I look at the spot where the beaded lamp used to be before my aunt took it home. I think about all the Sunday calls I never saved. I think about the note she left me with the recipe collection, the one I read alone in my car in the driveway after everyone had gone. It said, "You always knew the value of things. I just made sure they knew it too. Love, Gran." I folded it back up and put it in the glove compartment. I've moved it twice since then, once to my desk drawer and once to the box where I keep the things I want to keep. Not because I need to be reminded, because some things deserve to be kept somewhere safe. If there is someone in your life right now who receives everything you have to give and acknowledges none of it, who calls you when the system breaks down but never calls you just to hear your voice, I want you to hear this. That is not love with bad communication. That is a transaction dressed up as love, and you are allowed to renegotiate the terms. You are allowed to present the invoice. You are allowed to change the account access and let them find out the way people find out when the automatic payment stops going through. You built the system. You know where the levers are. You don't have to wait for permission to use them.